The morning sun rose over the tall glass building of Empire Tech, its golden light reflecting off the windows like a mirror of power and success. Inside that building, hundreds of employees rushed through the lobby, their faces busy, some cheerful, some tired, none realizing that their lives were about to change in a way they could never imagine. The man who owned the entire company, Richard Hale, stood silently across the street. His suit was gone. His watch worth thousands was locked away in a drawer. In his place stood a man wearing faded gray overalls, worn shoes, and a simple blue cap. He looked nothing like the billionaire CEO he truly was. Today, Richard was not entering as the boss, but as the new janitor. For months he had been worried. Reports said productivity was falling, morale was low, and customer complaints had increased. He could not understand why. His managers gave excuses. His board blamed the economy, but Richard wanted the truth, not from fancy reports or polished meetings. He wanted to see his company from the ground level, to hear the whispers, to feel the real air of his workplace, so he made a plan. He contacted a friend in human resources. Using a fake identity named Ray Harper, he was hired through a cleaning agency. No one knew his real face except that one trusted friend for everyone else. He was just another janitor who came to mop the floors that morning. As he walked into the building through the staff entrance, his heart raced. It had been 20 years since he'd done any kind of manual work. The smell of cleaning liquid filled his nose. The heavy mop bucket splashed against his pants, and he smiled quietly to himself. This is the reality they live every day, he thought. The security guard barely looked at him, just waved him through. Inside, he saw his employees rushing past him, their shoes clicking, their voices echoing. Some were polite, nodding with a brief smile. Others ignored him completely, like he didn't exist for the first time. Richard felt invisible in his own empire, and it opened his eyes. By mid-morning, he was assigned to the 7th floor, the floor of the marketing department. It was one of the noisiest areas. Phones ringing, printers humming, people gossiping in corners. He quietly mopped near the desks, pretending not to listen, but his ears caught everything. One employee whispered about how management never cared. Another complained that bonuses were cut while the CEO probably bought another car. Richard's hand froze on the mop. His heart sank. He wanted to shout, to tell them that he worked day and night, that he cared deeply, but he stayed silent. He reminded himself that today, he wasn't Richard Hale, the CEO. He was Ray the janitor, the man who cleaned up their spilled coffee. At lunchtime, he sat in the cafeteria corner, eating a simple sandwich he brought in a paper bag. From there, he watched his people, the people he thought he knew. Some were laughing and kind, sharing food with others, but a few treated the cafeteria staff poorly, snapping fingers or leaving trays on the table. Those small acts spoke louder than any board report. Later in the day, he saw a young intern drop her files. Papers scattered everywhere before he could step forward. Another worker walked by and laughed. "Newbie mistake," he said. Only one person bent down to help her, a quiet man from IT. His hands were rough, but his smile was gentle. Richard noted that moment carefully. Not all heroes wear suits, he thought. As the clock struck 5, most employees rushed out. Leaving desks messy and half-work done, Richard stayed behind. Mopping in silence, alone in the office, he looked out at the skyline and felt something stir inside him. This building, his creation, had lost something important: kindness, respect, unity. That night, he returned home exhausted but thoughtful. His hands ached, his back hurt, but his heart was awake. He knew this was only the beginning. The truth he was searching for was deeper than dirty floors and careless words. He would return tomorrow to listen more, to watch more, to find out who his people truly were. And as he placed his janitor's cap on the table, Richard Hale whispered to himself with determination, "Tomorrow, Ray Harper goes back to work." The next morning, Richard woke before sunrise. His muscles ached from the mopping, but his mind refused to rest. He had not felt this kind of anticipation in years, not since the early days when he built Empire Tech from a rented basement. He looked at his reflection in the small mirror above the sink. The blue janitor uniform hung loosely on him, but his eyes, sharp and determined, gave away who he really was. He smiled faintly. "Time for another day of truth," he murmured. When he reached the building, the cleaning supervisor handed him a new schedule. "Ray, today you'll be covering the executive floor," she said. Richard froze for a moment. The executive floor, his own kingdom. The place where decisions were made. Deals were signed and profits discussed. None of the people there knew the janitor was actually their CEO. He pushed his cleaning cart into the elevator and took a deep breath as the doors opened. The familiar scent of leather chairs and expensive perfume hit him. The floor was silent except for the faint hum of air conditioning. He started wiping down the glass doors one by one, pretending to be invisible. 2 senior managers entered the corridor, their voices low but sharp. "The old man doesn't even show up anymore," one of them said, laughing. "He probably doesn't have a clue what's really happening here," the other replied. "As long as he signs the checks, who cares?" Richard's heart tightened. He recognized their voices, Daniel Pierce, his marketing head, and Elaine Carter, operations director. Both had been with the company for years, trusted, respected, or so he thought. Their laughter echoed as they walked past him without a glance. He continued sweeping, his mind heavy. He wondered how many others thought like them. How many smiled in meetings but mocked him behind his back. A few minutes later, he saw another conversation that shook him even more. Near the conference room, a junior accountant was being scolded by her supervisor. "You're lucky to even have this job," the man snapped. "Do as I say, or I'll make sure you're gone by next month." The young woman's hands trembled as she nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. The supervisor turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone. Richard quietly walked over and handed her a tissue. She looked up, surprised. "Thank you, sir," she whispered softly. He smiled. "It's all right, miss. Everyone deserves a little kindness." She didn't know it. But the janitor she spoke to owned the company she worked for. As the day went on, he moved silently through the corridors, gathering not only trash but also fragments of truth. He saw who worked hard and who pretended, who cared and who only acted for show. He noticed the small things: an assistant who stayed late helping a colleague, a team leader who ignored the janitors like they were furniture, a receptionist who smiled even when tired around noon. He entered the boardroom to mop the floor. The large table gleamed, the very one where he had once sat as CEO. On the wall hung his portrait, a framed photo of himself smiling confidently in a suit. He looked at it and almost laughed. That man has no idea what's happening behind his smile, he thought. Suddenly, a group of executives entered the room. Unaware of his presence, he quickly bent down, pretending to scrub. Their voices filled the room. "If the rumors are true, the company might start layoffs," one said. "Good. Maybe the old man will finally sell his shares," another added. "He's out of touch anyway." Richard froze. The betrayal stung deeper than any insult. These were people he trusted, the same ones who toasted his name at company dinners. Now they saw him as weak, outdated, replaceable. After they left, he leaned on his mop and took a deep breath. For the first time, he felt the full weight of leadership, not the power, but the loneliness, the kind that comes when loyalty is just a word, not a truth. That evening, while cleaning the lobby, he overheard 2 guards talking near the doors. One of them said, "You know that new janitor, Ray? He's different, always says thank you, always helps out." The other chuckled. "Yeah, he's too polite for a cleaner." "Maybe he used to be someone important," Richard smiled faintly. "If only you knew," he thought. When his shift ended, he sat outside the building, watching his employees leave. Some laughed together, some dragged their feet, some looked lost. He realized something powerful. This disguise had given him what money never could, a true look into the human heart. He whispered to himself, "Tomorrow I'll dig deeper. I'll find the good ones, the real ones." The city lights flickered across his tired face. The man who once ruled from the top floor now understood what it meant to walk the lowest hallways. As he stood up, his eyes burned not with anger, but with resolve. The janitor's journey was just beginning, and soon, the entire company would feel the truth he was uncovering. The 3rd morning of Richard's undercover mission began with a strange calm. The air was cool, the sky soft gray, and the city still waking up. He arrived early, long before most employees, pushing his mop bucket through the empty hallways of Empire Tech. The echo of his footsteps was the only sound. It gave him time to think, not as a CEO, but as a man who had been blind to the truth. He had seen greed, disrespect, and arrogance in the last 2 days. But he had also seen a spark of kindness, small, quiet yet powerful. Today he promised himself to find those sparks, to see who among his people carried goodness without reward. By 8 a.m., the office lights began to flicker on. and employees poured in, talking, laughing. Rushing with coffee cups in hand, Richard was assigned to clean the customer service department, a place filled with ringing phones and stressed voices. It was the face of the company, the part that dealt directly with customers. He wondered how the employees here truly treated the people they served, as he wiped down desks and emptied bins. He overheard a young woman answering a call. Her tone was calm and patient. "Yes, ma'am, I understand. Please don't worry. We'll fix it right away," she said softly. The caller on the other end was shouting, but she never lost her composure. After hanging up, she sighed and whispered. Another angry one, but still smiled. Richard noticed her name tag, Clara Bennett. She couldn't be more than 25, yet she carried herself with grace. He watched quietly as another coworker mocked her. "Why bother being nice, Clara? They'll yell no matter what." The man smirked. Spinning in his chair, Clara replied gently, "Because someone has to stay kind." Those words hit Richard like lightning. He wrote her name down in a small notebook he now kept hidden in his cleaning cart. Clara, heart of the company, he scribbled under her name. Later that morning, he moved to the cafeteria, where workers gathered for their breaks. He noticed how different people behaved there. Some cleaned up after themselves, while others left a mess without care. One man, in particular, stood out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing an expensive suit. Kevin Brooks, the head of finance. Richard recognized him instantly. Kevin finished eating and left his tray, half full, on the table. His assistant rushed over, picked it up, and threw it away. "You shouldn't do that," Richard said softly as he wiped the table. The assistant looked embarrassed. "If I don't, he'll yell." Richard's jaw tightened. He had once promoted Kevin because of his impressive numbers, never realizing the man's arrogance was poisoning others. Now, as a janitor, he saw what spreadsheets could never reveal: character. By noon, he returned to the elevator, where he met the same IT worker who had helped the intern 2 days ago. The man smiled warmly. "Hey, Ray, long day already?" Richard nodded. "Yeah, never ends." The IT worker handed him a bottle of water. "Stay hydrated, man. We all need each other around here." Richard thanked him sincerely. His name tag read Samuel Ortiz. Another name Richard wrote in his secret notebook: Samuel, humble soul. In the afternoon, something unexpected happened. One of the cleaning machines broke down in the hallway, leaking dirty water across the floor. People walked around it, complaining about the smell. "Gross," someone said. "Where's the janitor when you need him?" Richard knelt down instantly. Trying to fix the machine, Clara, the kind girl from customer service, hurried over with paper towels. "Let me help you," she said. Kneeling beside him, he smiled. "You don't have to." She laughed softly. "Neither do you, but you are, so I will too." Together they cleaned the mess while everyone else walked past. When they finished, she said, "You know, you're the only one here who says good morning to everyone, Ray." He looked at her kindly. It cost nothing to be decent. For a moment, he felt peace, a simple connection untainted by status. It reminded him why he had built the company in the first place. Not for money, but for people like her. As the day ended, he headed to the basement storage to return his tools. On his way, he overheard voices near the stairwell. It was Kevin Brooks again, talking on the phone. "Don't worry," Kevin said. "The CEO's clueless. We'll shift some funds, and no one will notice." Richard's blood ran cold. He froze in the shadows, listening. The conversation continued, hinting at manipulation and fraud within the accounts. When Kevin left, Richard leaned against the wall, his heart pounding. The kindness he had seen earlier now mixed with a new darkness. His company was divided, some full of light, others soaked in greed. That night at home, Richard sat by the window. His notebook lay open on the table, filled with names, and Clara, Samuel, and others he'd observed. He knew what he had to do, but he couldn't act yet. Not until he saw everything with his own eyes. As the city lights flickered below, Richard whispered, "To change a company, I must first understand its soul." He closed the notebook, put on his janitor's cap for the next day, and smiled faintly. The mission was far from over. The kind and the cruel had shown themselves, but the storm was only beginning. The fourth morning dawned heavy and gray. Rain tapped softly against the windows of Richard's apartment. He dressed slowly, the familiar janitor's uniform now feeling less like a disguise and more like a shield. The city outside was waking up, unaware that one of its wealthiest men was heading to work as a cleaner, ready to uncover the rot growing inside his empire. When he arrived at Empire Tech, the air inside felt colder than usual. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. The hallways smelled of fresh coffee and quiet tension. Richard's eyes were sharp, every sound, every whisper mattered now. He had heard Kevin Brooks talk about shifting funds, and that phrase had echoed in his head all night. Today he was assigned to clean the accounting department. Kevin's kingdom. Rows of cubicles stretched out like soldiers in formation. Computer screens glowed with numbers and spreadsheets. Richard pushed his cleaning cart through the aisles, nodding at employees who barely noticed him. He quietly observed how they worked. Some were focused, typing fast, while others were scrolling through their phones. He noticed one woman, Lydia, sitting at the corner desk, her eyes darting nervously as she looked at a thick folder marked Q3 expense adjustments. When she saw him glance at it, she quickly closed it and smiled awkwardly. "Just reports," she said, forcing a laugh. Richard nodded politely. "Of course, ma'am," and continued sweeping. But his mind recorded every detail. Around noon, Kevin Brooks strutted into the department. His expensive cologne filled the air before he even spoke. "All right, team," he said loudly. "Remember, no one touches the bonus sheets until I say so." His tone was commanding, almost threatening. He winked at Lydia as he passed her desk, and she avoided his eyes. Richard's suspicion grew stronger. He decided to clean Kevin's office next. The blinds were half drawn, papers stacked high. He noticed a locked drawer under the desk. On the surface, a few signed documents caught his eye. One of them read consultancy payments, external vendor. The signature at the bottom wasn't his. It was a forged version of his own name. Richard's hands trembled slightly as he wiped the table. "They're stealing right under my nose," he thought, anger boiling inside him. But he had to be careful. He couldn't reveal himself yet. He needed proof, real proof. At lunch, he sat in the cafeteria again, this time near a group of employees from different departments. The talk was casual at first. Weekend plans, new phones, gossip. Then one man said quietly, "Did you hear? Some people are getting fired soon." Another replied, "Yeah, but not the top ones. Only the ones who can't fight back." Richard listened silently, realizing the corruption was spreading beyond money. It was in the company's soul. After lunch, Clara Bennett from customer service found him again.
"Hey Ray, you look tired," she said kindly.
Handing him a small cup of coffee. He smiled. "Just a long day." She nodded. "You know, I wish our bosses cared as much as you do." Her words pierced deep. She had no idea she was speaking to the boss she wished for. That evening, he decided to stay late. Pretending to clean the executive floor, everyone had gone home, except for a few lights glowing inside Kevin's office. Through the glass, Richard saw Kevin and Lydia arguing. Lydia's voice was shaking. "I don't want to change those numbers." "Kevin, it's wrong," Kevin snapped. "Do as I say, or you'll lose your job." Richard's pulse quickened. He crouched behind a cabinet listening, Lydia whispered. "If the CEO finds out..." Kevin cut her off. "He won't. The old fool doesn't even know what day it is," he laughed. A cold, greedy sound. Then he handed her a folder. "Adjust the client refunds, make the numbers look better. We'll move the rest into the consultancy account." When they left, Richard quietly stepped inside, opened the folder they'd been fighting over, and took pictures of the pages with his old phone. He didn't need to be the CEO to recognize fraud, fake invoices, fake vendors, missing funds. It was all there. As he walked out of the office, the night security guard stopped him. "Working late again, Ray?" the guard asked. Richard smiled tiredly. "Yeah, just trying to keep things clean." The guard nodded. "You're one of the good ones, man. Not like the people upstairs." Those words echoed in Richard's heart as he stepped out into the rain. He realized his mission had grown bigger than uncovering bad behavior. It was now about saving his people, the ones who worked hard, who smiled through struggle, who believed in honesty. The fifth morning came with a strange tension in the air. The storm from last night had passed, but something inside Richard still rumbled like thunder. He woke up before dawn, sat quietly by his kitchen table, and stared at the photos he'd taken. The forged signatures, the fake invoices, the truth of betrayal. His company had grown corrupt not because of bad luck, but because of bad hearts today. He planned to test those hearts when he reached Empire Tech. The building looked the same, shiny floors, Clean glass, smiling faces. But Richard now saw beyond appearances. Every handshake, every polite smile seemed rehearsed. He knew that loyalty was no longer measured in words but in actions. His cleaning schedule placed him in the Human Resources Department that day, a place filled with polite voices, scented candles, and posters about teamwork. Ironically, it was also where favoritism thrived. Richard pushed his cart inside and began dusting near the desks. Listening quietly, 2 HR officers were whispering. "Kevin said we'll cut 5 junior employees this week," one murmured. "Even the ones who've been performing well." The other sighed. "He's keeping the ones who bring him gifts, though. That's how this place works now." Richard felt his chest tighten. It wasn't just fraud. It was injustice. People who worked hard were being punished while flatterers were being rewarded. That wasn't the company he built. That wasn't the family he once dreamed of leading. A few hours later, Clara passed by. Holding a box of documents, she stopped when she saw him. "Morning, Ray. How are you holding up?" He smiled faintly. "One day at a time," she laughed softly. "That's the spirit." Then she added, "Did you hear? They're firing good people again. I helped train one of them. She's a single mother. It's not fair." Her words struck a deep chord. Richard wanted to tell her, "I'm going to fix this, I promise." But he couldn't, not yet. He only nodded and said gently, "Sometimes fairness comes late, but it still comes." Clara gave him a puzzled look, not realizing those words carried the weight of a vow. Later in the day, Richard saw Samuel Ortiz again, the kind IT worker who had offered him water earlier that week. Samuel was sitting in the break room fixing a broken coffee machine. "Need a hand?" Richard asked. Samuel smiled. "Nah, I got it. You know, this company's got problems, but I still believe in good people." Richard's lips curved slightly. "You still believe in that, huh?" Samuel nodded firmly. "Always, you can't run a place on fear or greed. It never lasts." Those simple words filled Richard with pride and pain at once. Samuel didn't know he was speaking to the man who could change everything. Around noon, Richard witnessed something that became a turning point. In the main hallway, Lydia, the accountant who had argued with Kevin, was walking nervously with a sealed envelope. Her face was pale, she looked terrified. Kevin appeared behind her, his voice low and threatening. "Don't even think about it. Lydia," he hissed, "you hand that report over, and I'll destroy your career." Richard stopped sweeping, his grip tightening on the mop handle. Lydia turned, trembling. "I can't do this anymore, Kevin. It's wrong." Kevin leaned closer, his voice full of venom. "You owe me, remember that." Then he walked away. Leaving her in tears, Richard approached her slowly, speaking in his calm janitor tone. "Miss, you okay?" Lydia wiped her face. "Yeah, it's nothing. Just work stuff," he said gently. "Sometimes doing the right thing feels heavy, but it's still worth carrying." She looked at him, startled by his words. "You sound like you've been through this before." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I have." That evening, as most employees left, Richard lingered near the elevators. He saw Lydia walk toward the HR office again. Holding that same envelope, her steps were hesitant. But she didn't turn back this time. She handed it to the HR head and whispered something before leaving quickly. He knew what that envelope was, and a report, maybe even proof of Kevin's fraud. Lydia had chosen courage over fear. Richard's respect for her grew instantly. Another name added to his secret notebook, Lydia. Brave heart, but his test wasn't over yet. He wanted to see how others reacted to truth. So the next morning, he spread quiet rumors through the janitorial team that someone was investigating the company from the inside. The news spread like wildfire through the floors. People began whispering nervously. Some laughed it off, others panicked. And a few started behaving suddenly nicer, trying to hide their guilt. Richard watched it all unfold, and the difference between the genuine and the fake became crystal clear. Clara remained the same. Kind, respectful, steady. Samuel stayed humble, helping others fix printers, but Kevin and his allies grew tense, whispering in corners, moving files around, deleting emails late at night. By the end of the week, Richard had all the evidence he needed. Names, photos, voices, everything. Yet what moved him most wasn't the corruption he uncovered. It was the small acts of loyalty he had witnessed from people like Clara, Samuel, and Lydia as he left that evening. He paused by the front doors and looked back at the Empire Tech logo shining above the lobby. It wasn't just a company anymore. It was a reflection of the human soul. Both bright and dark, he whispered to himself. Now I know who stands with me and who stands against me. His eyes gleamed not with anger, but with resolve. The test of loyalty was over. The time for truth was about to begin. Morning sunlight poured over the glass towers of Empire Tech. But inside Richard's heart, a different storm was brewing. It was the day he had been preparing for since the moment he put on that janitor's uniform. The day when truth would rise, when masks would fall, and when every loyal heart would finally be seen. He had spent weeks living two lives, the billionaire CEO hidden behind a humble mop, and the silent observer among his own employees. Now, the lines between those two men had blurred. He was no longer sure which version of himself was more real. The janitor had shown him the world as it truly was. Raw, honest, unfiltered. That morning he entered the building as usual, wearing the same blue uniform, the same worn shoes, but something in his walk was different. Every step carried purpose. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a message from the company's legal team. Mr. Hale, all documents have been verified. We are ready when you are. He typed a short reply. Today, the first half of the day moved quietly. Clara waved to him from her desk with her usual smile. Morning, Ray, she said. He smiled back. Morning, Clara. Big day ahead, she laughed softly. Every day feels big lately, her voice innocent and kind. Was the very reason he was doing this, for the ones who still believed in good. In the cafeteria, he noticed Kevin and his group talking in hushed tones. Their laughter was forced, their eyes restless. They had heard the rumors of an internal investigation, and it was eating them alive. Kevin glanced at Richard once and smirked. Hey, janitor, don't spill your bucket near my table today, he said arrogantly. Richard just nodded. I'll try not to, sir. The word sir carried quiet irony. Around noon, the company intercom buzzed. Attention, all staff. A mandatory meeting will be held at 2 p.m. in the main conference hall. A murmur spread through the floors. Some were confused, others nervous. No one had seen the CEO in months, and now suddenly there was an all-staff announcement. Richard finished his cleaning quietly and went to the restroom. There he stood before the mirror, staring at the man in the janitor's clothes. He slowly removed the blue cap, wiped his face, and whispered, Time to come home. At 1:50 p.m., hundreds of employees filled the large conference hall. The chatter was loud and uncertain. The board members sat at the front, including Kevin, who looked irritated. Where is the CEO? Someone whispered. Is this about the layoffs? Another asked. Suddenly, the double doors opened, and silence fell like a wave. A man stepped in, the same janitor they'd seen mopping floors, carrying trash bags, greeting everyone with a smile. But now he wasn't pushing a cart. He walked straight, confident, and behind him followed two members of the legal team. At first people looked confused, then whispers began to spread. That's Ray. What's he doing here? Why is he walking like that? Richard reached the front, took off his cap, and placed it on the table. Then he looked up, his voice calm but strong. Good afternoon, everyone, he said. My name isn't Ray Harper. The room froze, even Kevin's smirk disappeared. Richard continued. My name is Richard Hale, and I am the CEO of Empire Tech. Gasps filled the room. Some stood in disbelief. Clara covered her mouth, eyes wide. Samuel from IT nearly dropped his coffee. But Kevin's face went pale. I came here not as your boss, but as one of you, Richard said, his tone steady. I wanted to see how my company truly runs. Not from the top floor, but from the ground. I wanted to see the truth that numbers cannot show. How people treat each other when they think no one important is watching. He paused. Looking across the crowd, I have seen kindness from those who expected nothing in return. His eyes met Clara's. And I've seen corruption, cruelty, and greed from those who were trusted the most. His gaze turned cold as it shifted to Kevin. The legal advisor handed him a folder. Richard opened it slowly. Here are the documents. Falsified expense reports, fake vendors, forged signatures, all approved by senior management. He placed them on the table with a sharp thud. Mr. Brooks, care to explain? Kevin stood up, his voice trembling. Sir, there must be some mistake. The only mistake, Richard interrupted, was trusting you. Security guards entered quietly and stood behind Kevin and two others. The entire room watched as they were escorted out, whispers rising like a storm. Richard turned back to the employees. his expression softening. To the rest of you, I saw you. I saw who you really are, the ones who work hard, who treat others with respect, who keep this company alive even when no one's watching. He smiled slightly. From now on, those are the people who will shape Empire Tech. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Samuel nodded with pride. Lydia, standing near the back, lowered her head and smiled through relief. Richard took a deep breath and said the words that would be remembered for years. A company isn't built by titles or profits, it's built by people, and today, I've met the best of them. As applause filled the hall, Richard felt something lift from his chest for the first time in years. He felt free, not as a CEO, not as a janitor, but as a man who had rediscovered the heart of his own creation. That evening, as he walked out of the building, the sun dipped behind the skyline. The glass walls reflected golden light, and in that reflection, he no longer saw power or pride. He saw purpose. He whispered softly, I went undercover to find the truth. But what I found was humanity. And with that, Richard Hale, the CEO who once hid behind a mop, smiled toward the horizon, ready to rebuild his empire, one honest soul at a time. The day after the revelation, Empire Tech was a completely different place. The air that once carried whispers of fear now hummed with quiet disbelief. Employees walked through the halls in stunned silence, glancing at each other as if unsure what was real anymore. Yesterday's janitor had been their CEO all along. Richard arrived early again, not in his janitor's uniform this time, but not in a flashy suit either. He wore a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled up, the kind of clothes that said, I'm still one of you. As he stepped through the lobby, even the security guard straightened in surprise. Good morning, Mr. Hale, he said with a respectful smile. Richard nodded. Good morning, and thank you for always treating everyone kindly. The guard looked touched, perhaps realizing the CEO had remembered every little gesture. Upstairs, murmurs spread quickly. He's here. Did you see him? He's really back. Some faces looked nervous, others hopeful. A few employees avoided eye contact altogether, afraid their behavior from the past week had already been noticed. Richard gathered his core staff in the main conference room. But this time the mood was not about punishment. It was about rebuilding. We can't erase what happened, he began softly, but we can decide what happens next. He looked around the table, seeing both familiar and humbled faces. Corruption was never our biggest problem. Indifference was, he said, his tone gentle but firm. We stopped caring about each other, and when that happens, a company loses its soul. He paused, his eyes landing on Clara, Samuel, and Lydia, seated quietly near the end. But I've seen something worth saving, he continued. I've seen kindness in the middle of chaos, integrity in silence, courage when no one was watching. Clara blushed faintly. Samuel nodded. Lydia looked down, tears glistening in her eyes. He turned toward the HR head. Effective immediately. We're restructuring the leadership teams. Promotions will no longer be about titles or friendship. They'll be about values. The HR director nodded, writing quickly. And, Richard added, I want an internal ethics committee. Employees from every department. Real people, not just managers. After the meeting, Clara approached him shyly. Sir, I don't know if this is okay to say, but thank you for what you did. He smiled. You don't need to thank me, Clara. You were one of the reasons I found my faith in this company again. She blinked. I was? He nodded. Yes, because kindness is rarer than gold, and you never stopped giving it. Her eyes filled with emotion. That means everything to me. Meanwhile, in another corner of the building, the absence of Kevin and his allies was already felt. The office seemed brighter, lighter, freer. Employees who once worked in silence now spoke openly, sharing ideas without fear. Laughter returned slowly, cautiously at first, but it was real. Samuel stopped by Richard's office later that day, carrying a repaired laptop. You dropped this last week. Thought I'd return it, Richard smiled. You still fixing things, Samuel? Samuel chuckled. Someone's got to, sir. Not everything's broken beyond repair. Richard laughed quietly. You're right, not everything. As the hours passed, news outlets began to pick up the story. Billionaire CEO goes undercover as janitor, exposes corruption. Headlines flashed across screens. Reporters camped outside the building, hoping for a glimpse of the man who had lived like an ordinary worker. But Richard ignored the cameras. He hadn't done it for fame. He had done it for truth. Late that evening, He took a walk through the same corridors he had once mopped, stopping by the break room where Clara had shared her coffee, the hallway where Lydia had found her courage, and the corner where Samuel had offered him water. Each spot carried a memory, a lesson, a reminder. In the cafeteria, he saw employees eating together, managers and interns at the same table, janitors and engineers laughing over tea. It wasn't perfect, but it was real for the first time. Empire Tech looked like a family again. He sat alone by the window, watching the city lights flicker against the night. His reflection stared back at him. Not the old, proud CEO, but a wiser, humbler man. He thought about how easy it had been to lose touch with people, how success had built walls around him, and how a mop and uniform had broken those walls down. Just then, Clara walked by, spotted him and waved. "You know, Mr. Hale, you still owe me a coffee," she teased. He laughed warmly. "You're right. I suppose I do," she smiled. "Then maybe tomorrow?" He nodded. "Tomorrow sounds perfect." As the clock struck 9, Richard stood up and turned off the lights in the cafeteria, whispering to himself, "The real work begins now." The empire he once ruled with power would now be rebuilt with trust. When he stepped outside, a gentle breeze brushed his face, carrying the scent of rain and renewal. He looked up at the night sky and smiled. The janitor had disappeared, but the man who had learned to listen, to truly see, had finally come alive. He whispered one last thought before heading home. Sometimes, to find the heart of a company, you have to sweep its floors first, and with that quiet truth, Richard walked into the darkness with peace in his heart, ready for the dawn of a better tomorrow. A full month had passed since the day of revelation, yet the echoes of that moment still lingered through every corner of Empire Tech. The company that once ran on fear and formality now thrived on warmth, honesty, and human connection. It was no longer just a workplace, it had become a heartbeat, steady and alive. Richard arrived at the office that morning carrying a simple black notebook, the same one he had used during his days as the janitor. It was worn, its corners frayed, but inside it held the names and notes that had changed everything. Clara, Samuel, Lydia, and a few others who had reminded him what integrity looked like. He flipped through it with a soft smile, each page a quiet victory. When he entered the building, the atmosphere felt lighter than ever before. People smiled more, laughed louder, and even greeted the cleaning staff with respect. The janitors, once invisible, now wore new uniforms with the company logo proudly stitched beside their names. That had been one of Richard's first decisions after returning. If they keep this place shining, he'd said, then their names should shine too. In the main lobby, a new sign stood tall on the wall, etched in silver letters. It read, "Greatness begins with gratitude." It was a simple phrase, but one born from Richard's own transformation. Every employee passed it each day, a small reminder of the lesson their CEO had lived to teach. Later that morning, a meeting was held in the conference hall, not one of scolding or fear, but of celebration. It was the company's first Integrity Day, an idea proposed by Clara herself. Employees gathered to honor those who had gone above and beyond, not for reward, but for kindness and courage. When Richard stepped on stage, the room erupted with applause, but he raised a hand gently. "No, today isn't about me," he said with a smile. "It's about the people who never needed a title to lead." His eyes moved across the audience until they found Clara, Samuel, and Lydia seated in the front row. These three reminded me what leadership truly means: compassion, honesty, and bravery. He invited them to stand. Clara blushed as the audience clapped for her. Samuel smiled shyly. Lydia held back tears. Richard continued, "When I came to this company years ago, I thought success was measured in profit. But when I cleaned its floors, I realized success is measured in how we treat the people who walk on them." The room went silent, the kind of silence that held respect, not fear. After the ceremony, he met the three privately in his office. The sunlight streamed through the tall windows. "You each showed me something I had forgotten," he said softly. "Clara, you taught me that kindness isn't weakness, Samuel. You reminded me that humility fixes what pride breaks, and Lydia, your courage gave this company a second chance." They stood speechless, overcome with emotion. Then Richard handed each of them a small envelope. Inside was a promotion letter, not to higher power, but to meaningful roles. Clara as head of employee relations, Samuel as director of IT ethics and systems, and Lydia as chief financial integrity officer. You three will ensure this company never forgets where it came from, he said warmly. They thanked him with trembling voices, but Richard shook his head. Don't thank me, he said. Thank the janitor. He was the one who learned what I had forgotten. Outside the office, life at Empire Tech moved on. The story of the undercover CEO had spread far and wide, inspiring other business leaders around the world, but inside, it was never treated like gossip. It was treated like a mirror, a story everyone could see a little of themselves in. In the weeks that followed, employees began small traditions. The staff cafeteria started a compliment wall, where workers wrote kind notes to each other. Managers took turns spending a day each quarter helping the cleaning team, learning what it truly meant to serve. The culture had changed not through policies, but through people. One evening, when the offices were quiet and the city lights shimmered outside, Richard walked the same old janitor's route one last time. His shoes echoed softly against the marble floor. He passed the same corners where he had overheard betrayal, where he had shared small conversations of hope, where he had found truth hidden under dust. He stopped by the supply closet, the one that had once held his mop and bucket, and found it cleaner, better lit. On the inside of the door, someone had taped a handwritten note. It read, "Thank you, Ray Harper, for seeing us when no one else did," signed simply, "The Cleaning Crew." Richard smiled gently, emotion welling in his chest. He reached out and ran his fingers across the note, then whispered, "No, thank you, for reminding me who I was meant to be." As he walked out for the night, the city stretched before him, glowing, endless, full of second chances. He looked back at the glass building, proud not of its size or its profit, but of its people. He whispered to the quiet air, "The real legacy isn't in wealth or power. It's in how deeply you care." And with that final truth, the man who had once gone incognito as a janitor smiled, knowing he had built not just a company but a story, one that would be told for generations. And somewhere deep inside him, the janitor and the CEO finally became one, walking side by side into a brighter tomorrow.